Hi, welcome back to Grains in Small Places. If you're new around here, my name's Kara. Welcome. Guys, we did it. We made it to 10,000 subscribers. Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. I really appreciate you. So to celebrate this milestone, I'm going to be making some fresh milled flour, yeasted, just original glazed donuts, kind of like the ones from Krispy Kreme, with a little bit of Matt's help. So let's get started. Okay, so now to get started making our glazed donuts, we're going to first weigh out our wheat berries. Now, I'm using mostly hard white wheat with a little bit of kamut. I will make sure to put a link to this recipe down in the description box below. That way you have it, and it will be in grams for those of you that prefer to weigh, and it'll also be in cups. Although it is a little bit more accurate doing it with weight as grams, but I understand all bakers are different, so I will try to keep my recipes available for all kinds of bakers. So I'm going to weigh out my hard white wheat. I'm going to use 320 grams of hard white wheat, and then I'm going to use 90 grams of my kamut. You could also sub spelt in here, or you could just use all hard white wheat, or you can sub hard red wheat for the hard white wheat. We just want to make sure it's mostly a hard wheat, that way it will be able to develop gluten, so we'll get that nice stretchy dough. So when we weigh out our wheat berries, then we mill it. That will give us that weight in flour. So that's a great thing to know. That way you're not wasting any flour or wheat berries. You know exactly how much you need for each recipe. Now, sometimes you may need just a little bit more or a little bit less depending on the temperature, the humidity, and where you're located. But in general, this is a great starting point. I'm going to take this over to my Nutrimill Harvest Grain Mill, and I do have a coupon code to share with you. That coupon code is GRAINY, and you can get $20 off your mill at Nutrimill.com. I'll put a link to that in the description box below as well. I will also go ahead and put a link for all of the things you see me using, my mixer, the mill, of course, the grain bins that I was just using, the scale, all that stuff I will put in the description box below. I get a lot of questions about those, so I want to make sure I have one place for you all to find them when need be. Okay, and then we're going to be using like a microwave safe bowl basically, or I'm just using this Pyrex measuring glass. And I'm using about 120 grams of water. That's going to be about a half a cup. And then I'm also going to use about 120 grams of whole milk, or that's a half a cup. I'm going to put these two together and heat them in the microwave for about 30 seconds or so. We don't want it to be hot to the touch. That can kill our yeast. We just want it to be nice and warm. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and grab my mixer now so it's ready to go. And as soon as the water and milk mixture is done in the microwave, we're going to just pour this in. Of course, you could heat this over your stove just very lightly. We don't want it, again, to be so hot that it kills our yeast. Okay, let me see if I can adjust this a little bit. Perfect. All right. While that mixture is heating in the microwave, you can go ahead and add in your baking soda and your salt to your freshly milled flour. We're going to be putting in just about a quarter teaspoon of baking soda and 1 teaspoon of salt. And just mix that until it's incorporated and combined, and then we can set that to the side for now. All right, now that our water and milk mixture is warm, I'm going to go ahead and add in 1 egg and mix to combine, just so I can make sure that's all broken up and evenly distributed. And then we're going to just pour this into our mixer along with about 100 grams of, I'm just using organic raw cane sugar, which is about a half a cup or so. Let me pull this a little bit closer. So we're going to hold off on putting in the softened butter for now. So you want to make sure that you had pulled that butter out previously to make sure that it is nice and soft. We don't want it to be melted, but we don't want it to be hard either, because it's going to end up going into the dough after it's all mixed together. So now that our liquid ingredients are mixed together, we can go ahead and add in our flour mixture where we added the salt and baking soda, and we're just going to mix this until combined, until there's not any more dry flour showing. Once all the flour is all mixed together and everything seems to be incorporated evenly, we're going to go ahead and cover this. We're going to cover this. This is, I guess, essentially our autolyse that I talk about. This is just allowing our fresh milled flour to start absorbing that liquid. It takes a lot longer for fresh milled flour to absorb the moisture, so we're going to make sure that we give it time to work. I like to let it sit covered at room temperature for at least 15 minutes before I add in my yeast. If you are using active dry yeast, some of the water from the recipe you could hold out, add your yeast, a pinch of the sugar from the recipe, and set it in a small bowl at this point in time. And then after about 15 minutes, 10-15 minutes, it should get nice and foamy. That's how you know your active dry yeast is ready to go. So you can go ahead and set that to the side. It should get foamy. And then when I put in my instant yeast, that is when you would put in your active dry yeast mixture. So this little trick here, I like to put the spoon on the top of my mixer. That way it reminds me to put in the yeast that I haven't put it in yet. Yes, I've done that before, and I've had messages from some of you guys that have done it as well. So it's just a nice little trick. It reminds you. It seems silly, but it really does seem to help. Okay, now that it's been about 15-20 minutes or so, now we can start mixing it on low speed, and we'll add in our yeast. We are looking for 2 teaspoons. I'm using instant yeast. And then we're going to start mixing that in until it's incorporated. Technically, we haven't done any real kneading yet, so this is still just the mixing of the ingredients prior and now. I think that is one thing some people get confused. They think that the kneading process starts as soon as you turn your mixer on and start mixing everything together, but we do need to give it a little time to mix together before we start the actual kneading process. So I think one of the things that's a little bit confusing for some people is times of kneading. Some people turn on their mixer and then start saying, you know, I've been kneading for 20 minutes or, you know, whatever number, 10, 15 minutes. And then other people will not start the clock until after this point in time. So I usually consider the kneading after we put the yeast in and it's all incorporated, and then I will start my kneading time. So maybe that'll help clear up some questions. All right, so now we have our softened butter, and we're going to put in about a tablespoon at a time. You can see this is nice and soft. I can just, you know, lightly touch it with this knife and it goes in and it's nice and creamy. So 1 tablespoon at a time, and then we're just gonna kind of let it mix together. This is similar to when you're making, I guess, like a brioche type dough. So I guess donuts are very similar to a brioche dough, but we're only using 1 egg. So you can see sometimes it gets stuck on the side of the mixer. No big deal. Just move it around where you need to. You'll find what works for your mixer and your dough. Every batch of dough is going to be just a little bit different. I think you'll find that as you continue making fresh milled flour baked goods. So we used a total of 1/4 cup of softened butter, which is about 57 grams. And you can see why it's important for it to be soft, because this dough is nice and soft. So when we want the butter to gently just get incorporated into the dough, rather than being really jagged and hard to mix in, or melted and then potentially kill your yeast or coat everything in the bowl. So it just is like the perfect texture to have softened butter that's about the same texture as your soft dough. So now we're going to start kneading our dough. You can see it kind of, you know, is being silly, wants to separate and not stay together. Generally in my Ankarsrum mixer, I usually knead right around the 2 o'clock position. Sometimes I will leave it at the 1 o'clock position, and sometimes I'll take it to the 3 o'clock position. But when I'm making bread, I really don't like to take it past the 3. I find that it just kind of beats up the dough. But if you keep it at the lower speeds, it just does a really nice, gentle kneading, and it makes the dough so like soft and supple. I can't really explain it unless you've seen it or felt how it happens. Maybe you can see it in the videos that I make. So anytime you're making a new recipe, anytime you are using a new wheat, anytime the weather's a little bit different, or if you're using a new mixer, all of those times I recommend that you stay near your mixer so you can watch what your dough is doing. If you make the same batch of bread every day with the same wheat berries, the same mixer and all that, yeah, you can set a timer and walk away and generally have great results. Occasionally something wonky goes on and there's an issue here or there. But in general, anytime you're new to it, you learn so much just by kind of watching the dough transform in front of your eyes. It's just kind of like an amazing moment. So it's just something that I really recommend you kind of watch the dough as it's kneading. If you can, I understand if you have small children or whatever, they may need you. I'm not saying to put the dough in front of your children, but you get the point. All right, so we're just gonna mix this until it's a nice stretchy dough. So if you need to stop your mixer, get your fingertips a little bit wet and then stretch on the dough. In the past, you've seen videos where I talk about the window pane, and then I think some people are maybe taking that too literally, and they're trying to stretch the dough super thin so they can see through it, and then if it tears a little bit, they'll keep kneading. But I don't want you to get too involved with worrying about the actual window pane. If your dough is nice and stretchy and wants to stay together, then you are there. You got the dough where it needs to be. You don't have to stretch it super thin where you can see light through it, and then if it tears, it's no good. That's not true. You want to just knead it until it's nice and stretchy. Some people describe it as, I guess, like the feeling of what your earlobe would be, that texture. It's just multiple different ways of trying to explain what the dough looks and feels like. And you can see here where I'm not continuing to put flour in here. I know that there's a misconception where we just keep putting flour in the bowl until it clears the sides, but that's not necessarily the case with fresh milled flour. That may be the case of what, you know, we all did with white flour. It's easy. You put the flour in the bowl until it clears the sides of the bowl, and then you're good to go. But with fresh milled flour, you can't really do that because your dough will end up too dry. So just as the time goes by and the kneading goes by, you'll see that the dough will just come together. There's no good way to explain it other than when you get to see it for yourself. So I will have to stop and check my dough here and there for stretchiness. Sometimes it rips super easy and it's not ready. Sometimes it's a little bit stretchy, so I'll pull another part of my dough from the bottom or something and see how stretchy. And once I get that nice stretchy dough, we're good to go. So this today took about 12 minutes. Yesterday it might have taken 20, the day after it might have taken 9, so it's a little bit different every time. Just going to put some oil on the outside of the ball of dough and the bowl so that it doesn't stick while it rises, and cover it. We're going to keep this covered for about an hour to 2 hours, depending on your home. If it's warm in your home, it probably will only take an hour. If it's a little chilly, it might take closer to 2 hours. If you're using active dry yeast, usually your rise time is a little bit longer than with instant yeast. Okay, now that it's been about an hour, I'm gonna get my rolling mat here, and again, I'll link all this stuff below. And I have my 3-inch biscuit cutter. So these are a little bit smaller than a traditional, I think 3.5-inch donut, but this is what I got, and I didn't want to have to buy anything special. And then I have this little funnel. Then I love this little wooden double mini roller. It is perfect for jobs like this. And if you struggle rolling out tortillas, this is what you need. This little mini roller is perfect for rolling out tortillas. It's like night and day from using a big rolling pin and rolling out your tortillas. So I'm gonna go ahead and line my mat and all of my utensils with a little bit of olive oil, put some on my hands so nothing sticks. So you wanna make sure you have some parchment paper lined baking sheets, that way you have somewhere for them to go after you've cut them out, because they're going to need a second rise. And then here's our dough. It's nice and doubled. It could have even maybe gone for another 10 or 15 minutes, but this is when it fit into my schedule, so that's when we're doing it. All right, so what I'm gonna do here is I'm just going to flatten this dough to about a 1/2 inch thick. I'm going to try to make it as even as possible. I do have a big rolling pin that has like thickness guides on it, which I do use for like pie crusts and stuff like that, but this little mini roller is so convenient for me. I really find I can do a pretty good job judging the thickness throughout. So just do your best at rolling it out about a 1/2 inch thick. You're going to end up re-rolling the scraps anyways, so if you get one that's a lot thicker than the others after you cut it, or a lot thinner, you can always throw that back in with the scraps to re-roll it. If you find that your dough keeps shrinking back at you, that just means that it needs to rest a little bit longer. So you can always just leave it on your cutting mat and your bowl upside down over top of it, and then just let it rest for maybe 10-15 more minutes, because the gluten hasn't quite relaxed to be able to roll out yet. So I think you'll find that will help rolling out. It was a little bit struggling with me. It was wanting to pull itself back in. Okay, so I'm using the big cutter to cut out the big donut part, and then I'm using the little part of my funnel to cut out the little hole in the center. And I was trying to decide if I should make donut holes with the centers or re-roll them back in, and I decided to go ahead and re-roll it all back in with the dough. That way I could get more of the full donuts, and the little donut holes just looked quite small, so I knew they would fry at different times and all that, so I went ahead and just made the decision to roll it back in with the rest of the dough. And oh, we're grabbing a little picture for you. Okay, so after you've cut them all out and you've got all these dough scraps left, you're going to go ahead and re-roll everything out to about a 1/2 inch again. And again, if the dough is fighting with you and shrinking back up the whole time, you can go ahead and let the dough sit for 10 or 15 minutes covered. You can flip that bowl back upside down if you want and let it just rise. And I'm having to kind of move these a little bit because I'm realizing I'm getting more donuts than I originally anticipated. So that's not a bad thing. More donuts are never a bad thing. It made it so it was possible for us to share with some of our family. So you can see I have to re-roll it out a few times until I get to the very last one little donut, and then I decided to go ahead and plop this little donut hole on the tray. It didn't work out quite as well, but it was fun to make. So we're going to go ahead and cover these with some plastic wrap. That way these can rise. So you can either let these rise on your counter for 30 to 40 minutes and then fry them. Or what I like to do is put them in the refrigerator for overnight. So I like to make my dough at night and then fry it in the morning. So the next morning we went ahead and pulled the donuts out of the refrigerator, put them on the counter for about an hour so they came up to room temperature, and then we preheated our cast iron with the oil in it. And you want to make sure that you get that oil up to like the 350 degrees Fahrenheit before you start frying. You can see a little bit, it wasn't quite all the way to 350, sometimes even 375 is better. You want it between 350 degrees Fahrenheit and 375 degrees Fahrenheit, because anything lower, they get a little bit soggy and they don't cook properly. Anything higher and they end up kind of burning on the outside and then being raw on the inside. Nobody wants that. So just make sure that you are checking the temperature of your oil, and then in between batches, check the temperature of the oil, let it come back up to that temperature. But sometimes it can take 20 minutes to preheat this oil in the cast iron skillets. So the amount of oil that you're going to need is going to vary on the size of your pan as well. So you're going to cook them for about 2 minutes on the first side and then flip it over. It should be a nice golden brown. And then another 2 minutes or so on the second side. That time may vary slightly for you. Don't put too many in the pan at once because that can cool your oil down too quickly. Also make sure you have somewhere to put the donuts after they're done. I like to put them on a baking sheet with paper towels. That way it can help drain off the excess grease. So we're going to prepare a just basic vanilla glaze. You're just going to take about 240 grams or 2 cups of powdered sugar, a pinch of salt. We're going to put in about 1.5 teaspoons of vanilla extract, and then 5 tablespoons of whole milk. That will vary. If it seems too liquidy, you want to put a little more powdered sugar. If it seems too thick, you want to add just a little bit more whole milk. A little bit of that milk goes a long way though, so make sure you're putting it in very slowly. While the donuts are still slightly warm, you can go ahead and put them in the glaze. You want it to be enough to coat them, but still most of it run off. So you don't want it to be a super thick coating. You're just going to dip both sides in there, let the excess drain off into the container, and then I like to put them on a little cooling rack with either parchment paper or paper towels underneath to just help with easier cleanup as they drain. This donut recipe is very similar to my Boston cream donut recipe. I know a lot of you had asked for me to make a video on those. So this is basically the dough portion of it. And then I have another video that will show you the pastry cream part of it, which is the filling. But basically those 2 videos will give you the main portions of making those Boston cream donuts. I will put a link to those in the description box below as well. And here they are, all finished, and they were delicious. So good. Thanks so much for hanging out with Matt and I today while we made these yeasted glazed donuts. Let me know down in the comments if you give these a try. These are also great for filled donuts, jelly filled, cream filled, whatever. It's the same recipe as my Boston cream donuts, which I'll put a link to that recipe down in the description box below, along with this recipe. And on my blog, you'll find all kinds of fresh milled flour recipes. Thanks so much for hanging out with us on our 10,000 subscriber celebration. I hope you'll give this recipe a try. So don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with your friends so we can keep growing. And thanks for stopping by Grains in Small Places. Goodbye. Thanks for 10K, guys.